Ayala's run through the Miami Open had already sparked conversations across the tennis world, not just because of the wins but because of what they represented, a young Filipina player stepping onto major stages and carrying with her the quiet but growing belief that Philippine tennis was no longer content with being a footnote. That momentum, that rising hum of expectation, followed her to Australia, where Melbourne Park was supposed to be just another stop on the calendar, another tournament in a long season. Instead, it became the epicenter of something no one in authority truly prepared for. On a night that should have been routine, organizers found themselves reacting instead of planning, adjusting instead of controlling, as the grounds transformed from a polished Grand Slam venue into a living, breathing expression of national pride. The question that echoed through the corridors of Melbourne Park was simple yet profound. Can a small country really do this? Can it bend the atmosphere of one of tennis's biggest stages around a single first-round match? As the sun rose over the Australian Open complex that Monday, the answer was already forming in the lines that curled around entrances, in the chants that began hours before the first ball was struck, and in the unmistakable sense that something historic was about to unfold. This was not Rod Laver Arena under the spotlight or a night session featuring global superstars. This was Court 6, a court usually reserved for purists, scouts, and the most dedicated fans, suddenly elevated into a focal point of the entire tournament. At the center of it all stood a 20-year-old woman from the Philippines, Alex Eala, a name that in a matter of hours would become inseparable from images of overflowing stands, overwhelmed security, and a crowd that refused to behave like a traditional tennis audience. Long before the players warmed up, Filipino fans poured into Melbourne Park in waves, wrapped in flags, faces painted in red, blue, and yellow, voices already hoarse from chanting a name that carried the hopes of more than 100 million people. They were not there for defending champions or household names, they were there for their own, and they wanted the world to know it. Court 6 changed character almost instantly, earning a new nickname whispered first by locals and then echoed online, Little Manila. The energy felt less like tennis and more like a football derby, with drums beating, songs breaking out spontaneously, and chants rolling across the stands in unison. This was not polite applause between points, this was raw, emotional, and unapologetically partisan. Tournament officials, despite being well aware of Eala's growing profile and the passion of Filipino sports culture, were caught off guard by the scale of it all. Standard crowd control plans buckled as bottlenecks formed at entrances and overflow fans packed around giant screens, watching every rally as if they were inside the stadium. The noise carried far beyond Court 6, bleeding into neighboring courts and drawing curious looks from players who wondered why a first-round match sounded like a final. Media attention followed quickly, cameras pointing not just at the court but at the stands, where the spectacle of devotion rivaled the tennis itself. American player Michael Chong, scheduled to play nearby, later admitted that the organizers had badly underestimated what was coming, noting that Eala's match was generating multiples more attention than matches featuring established Grand Slam champions. Numbers backed it up, social media spikes, broadcast interest, and foot traffic all told the same story. A player ranked outside the top tier had effectively hijacked the narrative of the day. When Eala finally walked onto the court to face American power hitter Alicia Parks, the pressure was immense, the kind that can paralyze even seasoned professionals. Millions watched from the Philippines in prime time, families gathered around televisions, entire communities invested emotionally in every point. Yet from the opening games, it was clear that Eala was not shrinking under the weight of expectation. Forged at the Rafael Nadal Academy, trained to embrace intensity rather than fear it, she played as if the noise fueled her rather than distracted her. The first half hour of tennis felt surreal, a masterclass in channeling chaos into clarity. She moved with purpose, struck with conviction, and carried herself like someone who believed this moment had always been meant for her. Every forehand drew roars that shook the stands, every backhand winner sent waves of sound rolling across the park. Parks, a talented and dangerous opponent known for her power, looked rattled, not by the tennis alone but by the environment, where every missed shot was met with an eruption that blurred the line between support and intimidation. Online debates about etiquette ignited almost immediately, questions about whether the crowd had crossed a boundary, but inside Court 6, those concerns felt irrelevant. This was no longer just a tennis match, it was a statement, a declaration that representation matters and that passion can reshape even the most tradition-bound spaces. Eala dismantled Parks early, dictating rallies, absorbing pace, and redirecting it with intelligence beyond her years. The first set slipped away from the American in stunning fashion, and the belief in the stands surged into something almost euphoric. Strangers hugged, tears flowed freely, and for a brief stretch of time, the impossible felt not just achievable but inevitable. Melbourne Park had seen champions rise and fall, but it had rarely seen a first-round match ignite such collective emotion. The atmosphere bordered on disbelief, as if everyone present sensed they were witnessing the birth of something larger than a single result. Yet tennis, for all its beauty, is unforgiving, a sport built on momentum that can vanish as quickly as it appears. Just as Ayala mania reached its peak, just as fans began imagining a dream run unfolding before their eyes, the balance began to shift, almost imperceptibly at first. Parks, to her credit, refused to disappear. Instead of crumbling, she dug in, finding resolve in adversity. She reset, steadied her breathing, and began to trust the weapons that had brought her to this level. Her serve, shaky early, started to find its rhythm, first serves biting into corners, aces slicing through the charged air. The power game that defines her style emerged, not in bursts but with growing consistency. What followed would become a lesson in fine margins, the kind that separates fairy tales from harsh reality. Ayala continued to create opportunities, reading the game well enough to earn chance after chance, but conversion proved elusive. Break points came and went, each missed one adding invisible weight to her shoulders. Tennis is often decided not by brilliance alone but by execution in the tightest moments, and slowly, the match began to tilt. Park's serve became her shield and sword, bailing her out repeatedly when danger loomed. The crowd, still loud, grew more anxious, cheers tinged with desperation rather than certainty. Ayala fought, chased, and defended with everything she had, but the dynamic was changing. The American was no longer reacting, she was dictating, using power to pull Ayala wider and deeper behind the baseline. By the time the second set settled, the momentum had clearly shifted, and the once unthinkable possibility of a comeback was now real. The roar that had defined the opening act softened into a tense murmur, as everyone present realized that history was no longer guaranteed, that belief alone might not be enough. The second set opened with a very different emotional temperature inside Court 6, the earlier euphoria replaced by a nervous energy that clung to every rally. Alicia Parks stepped onto the baseline with a calm that hadn't been there before, her body language sharper, her routine slower and more deliberate, a clear sign that she had found her footing in the storm. From the very first game, it was evident that the match had entered a new phase. Parks began to lean heavily on her serve, trusting it not just to start points but to end them outright. Aces cracked through the air, some untouched, others glanced at in disbelief by Ayala as they landed cleanly on the lines. Within minutes, Parks had raced to a 3-games-to-love lead, and for the first time all day, Court 6 fell into something close to silence. The chants didn't disappear, but they lost their swagger, becoming pleas rather than celebrations. Yet if this tournament had already proven anything about Alex Eala, it was that she does not fold easily. Drawing on the resilience that had carried her through junior Grand Slams and the grind of the professional circuit, she dug deep and clawed her way back into the set. She began extending rallies again, using her movement and anticipation to neutralize Park's raw power. 3 games in a row went her way, and just like that, the scoreboard read 3-all. The noise returned in full force, a surge of belief crashing over the stands as fans sensed another momentum swing. For a fleeting moment, it felt as if the script was being rewritten once more, destiny bending back toward the young Filipina. But this time, Parks did not panic. She responded with authority, firing consecutive aces that cut through the crowd's optimism like a blade. Those serves didn't just win points, they sent a psychological message that she was no longer intimidated, no longer reacting, but fully in control. She held serve with confidence, then pressured Ayala immediately in the next game, forcing errors with deep, heavy ground strokes. The set slipped away, 6-3, and with it went the sense of inevitability that had defined the opening act. Momentum in tennis is a fragile thing, and by the end of the second set, it belonged firmly to the American. The third set became a test not just of skill, but of endurance, belief, and emotional control. Parks carried her confidence forward, her shots growing heavier, her footwork more assertive. Ayala continued to fight, chasing down balls that seemed out of reach and crafting points with intelligence, but the margins were no longer falling her way. The American's power began to tell, pushing Ayala farther behind the baseline and robbing her of the time she needed to construct points on her terms. Games slipped by, and with each one, the uphill climb grew steeper. When Parks sealed the match with a 4-hand winner down the line, blasting past a full-stretch Ayala, the roar that followed was not triumphant but stunned. The final score told a story of reversal, a comeback etched into the record books, but it couldn't capture the emotional journey that had unfolded on that court. For Ayala and her supporters, The loss was crushing precisely because victory had felt so close. Yet what happened after the final point is what truly elevated the day from a memorable match to a defining moment. Ayala did not simply shake hands and disappear into the tunnel. She stood, absorbing the scene, visibly overwhelmed by the outpouring of love cascading from the stands. Security personnel moved in, not out of fear but necessity, forming a protective ring as fans surged forward, desperate to get closer, to offer words of comfort, to say thank you. It was a scene more reminiscent of pop culture hysteria than professional tennis, a first-round loser receiving an ovation usually reserved for champions. Fans cried openly, chanted her name, waved flags, and pressed against barriers as Ayala slowly made her way off the court. What should have been a brief walk to the locker room turned into a procession, each step punctuated by gestures of gratitude, nods, waves, and moments of shared emotion. Australian Open staff later admitted they had never witnessed anything like it, not for a match at this stage of the tournament, not for a player without a major title to her name. But the day was not over. Despite the emotional and physical toll of the singles defeat, Ayala returned to the court for doubles, partnering with Portugal's Francisco Inigo Gamera Martins. Once again, she competed with intensity, refusing to let disappointment dull her edge. The match stretched into another three-set battle, a grind against experienced opponents who knew how to manage big moments. Ayala and her partner fought bravely, pushing points deep, refusing to concede easily, but in the end, heartbreak struck again. 2 matches, 2 three-set losses, both hard-fought, both emotionally draining. For many players, that would have been enough to retreat inward, to shut out the noise and the disappointment. Ayala chose a different path. Instead of hiding, she addressed her supporters directly, turning to social media not with excuses or frustration, but with gratitude and perspective far beyond her years. In words that quickly spread across platforms, she spoke about the overwhelming support she had felt throughout the week, describing it as deeply moving and reminding herself and others that her work was part of something shared. She acknowledged the privilege of competing on such a stage and promised to carry the experience forward as fuel rather than burden. These were not polished public relations lines, but genuine reflections from a young athlete aware of the responsibility she carries. She did not blame the pressure, the crowd, or the missed opportunities. She embraced the moment in its entirety, the joy and the pain intertwined. The tennis world took notice. Commentators who had once viewed her as a promising prospect began speaking of her as a cultural force, a player whose impact extended far beyond rankings and results. Debates erupted online about whether she might already be one of the most recognizable figures in women's tennis, not because of trophies, but because of the devotion she inspires. The argument was not without merit. Few players, regardless of ranking, can command that kind of attention, can transform a side court into the heartbeat of a Grand Slam. Few can inspire such loyalty that crowd management becomes a logistical challenge. And yet, Melbourne was only the beginning. Within hours of her doubles defeat, Ayala boarded a plane bound for Manila, where an entirely different kind of pressure awaited. The inaugural Philippine Women's Open loomed, a homecoming charged with expectation and emotion. For years, Filipino fans had watched her from afar, waking early or staying up late to follow her matches on screens. Now, she was bringing the fight home. The tournament, initially conceived as a developmental event, had suddenly gained international attention. Players from across the tour confirmed interest, drawn not just by prize money or ranking points, but by the promise of an atmosphere unlike any other. Ayala's presence alone had elevated the event, turning it into a must-watch moment on the calendar. But playing at home carries its own weight. The pressure of representing your country abroad is heavy, but the pressure of doing so in front of your own people can be heavier still. Every point would be magnified, every mistake felt more deeply, every win celebrated more loudly. The lessons from Melbourne would need to be absorbed quickly. The numbers from the Park's match painted a clear picture of where growth was needed. Creating opportunities was not the issue, finishing them was. Break points left unconverted, serves that didn't deliver enough free points, moments where ruthlessness could have turned the tide. These are the margins that separate contenders from champions. Ayala has shown she can dominate stretches of high-level tennis, but sustaining that dominance across an entire match against powerful opponents remains the next step. The mental side, too, demands refinement, the ability to stay composed as momentum swings wildly, to quiet the noise both inside and outside the stadium. Fortunately, she is not navigating this journey alone. Her foundation at the Rafael Nadal Academy has given her access to elite coaching and sports psychology, tools designed precisely for moments like these. Nadal himself built a career on converting pressure into purpose, and those lessons will be invaluable as Eala's spotlight grows brighter. Melbourne Park may have delivered heartbreak on the scoreboard, but it also confirmed something undeniable. Alex Eala is no longer just a promising player, she is a phenomenon.